Teresa Cummings, appearing on behalf of NARMCO, North Australian Rural Management Consultants, and also as a member of Katherine Mining Services Association.
Thank you.
Jeff Crowhurst, Chairman of Katherine Mining Services Association.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, when you're ready.
Yeah. So, firstly, just like to remind about KMSA, the Katherine Mining Services Association. We're a group of service providing businesses that support all sorts of industries, and we always welcome new, safe and economically sustainable industries in our region to apply our trades and services to. The Katherine region has been a shrinking economy, and that has been even across the time of this inquiry, that needs to be turned around to support the Developing the North initiative and create real jobs for the present working resources and our youth into the future. The concern of the negative impact on skilled and unskilled labour is absurd. We should be striving to the opportunities that are available to us. We can only see a positive impact on job opportunities that operate 365 days a year versus fly-in, fly-out seasonal opportunities that we work with presently. We are concerned about a negative impact. The concern of a negative impact on our infrastructure and infrastructure and the presumed applied will turn to infrastructure upgrades because they become viable. Coexistence of all industries is what KMSA is promoting to allow opportunities to rise to the top. We feel that we are underutilising both the land and our resources, which is labour resources, which is supported by the high unemployment rate in the NT presently. KMSA supports all recommendations 13.1 to 13.10 of the summary of the draft final report. These are all initiatives that we as a volunteer association have been in some form or another of support throughout all different associations and groups that we work with. My own business, Crowhurst Goodline, is a true example of a company that has been impacted by the moratorium, which is a drop of staff by 75%. Not all of this is attributed to the oil and gas industry downturn, but our income from an industry that we have serviced for 6 years previously in its infancy has resulted this year, in the last financial year, of a zero income. I'm glad we have a broad range of industries that we service, as at some occasion they all have their downturns. We've seen our cattle industry have the live export ban. We've seen our melon industry have mottle mosaic virus. It goes on and on. So all industries are volatile. I don't think there's any safe ones anymore. So the oil and gas or mining industry is no different. I think they're all become quite volatile. So in conclusion, KMSA is still of the opinion that the decision process be made from the science and fact material rather than the emotional material. This should provide the whole of the NT community with a tested and well-tested and explored outcome, whatever that be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowhurst. Yes.
Okay, my focus will be on initially recommendations 14.7, 14p and 8, and then a discussion on local engagement. Recommendation 14.7, in terms of that recommendation, it's reasonable to be compensated for fair commercial rate for direct impact on pastoral operations. In terms of expediting land access agreements, there is merit in having a minimum and maximum range of compensation parameters for infrastructure and operational impacts, rather than perhaps a fixed rate. Both pastoralists and gas companies can commence their negotiations within these parameters. It reduces the incidence of either party having extreme and potentially untenable positions at the commencement of negotiations. And for pastoralists who are not skilled or knowledgeable in compensation negotiations, it gives them both some guidance and some protection. So accept that that's a reasonable ask. In terms of recommendation 14.8, that the government consider whether a royalty payment scheme should be implemented to compensate pastoral lessees, our view is that it's not acceptable that pastoralists be compensated by royalty in any form. There are a number of reasons that I'll articulate why this could not be a positive decision and or recommendation could create detrimental unintended consequences. The reasons include, but are not limited to, pastoralists lease the land, they don't own it. It's not commonly understood across the NT that NT pastoralists don't own the land. And in general community discussion right across the territory, most people are shocked because you're selling these because the pastoral property is being sold for such large sums. There's an assumption that they're acquiring the land below it. When you have detailed conversations about the fact that it's leasehold and owned by the Crown, most people are quite shocked in the general community. So rather the pastoralists lease the land, and in doing so they pay a rental payment to the NT government for land which ultimately belongs to the Crown. Many people, as I mentioned, are surprised to learn that they own the land ultimately via the Crown and that it's leased. When they begin to understand, they form some fairly firm views that pastoralists shouldn't gain an additional royalty from the land that they only lease, particularly when there's an opportunity for compensation through the land lease agreements. And opportunities to generate additional income if the pastoralist wants to do some of that infrastructure development works on behalf of the gas companies. There are 224 pastoral leases. The NT government only collects $5 million per annum from these leases, or attempts to collect, because again this industry can cite cyclical downturns or productivity issues and seek relief. But that's an average of $22,000 per lease. It's not like they've incurred significant or huge rental imposts on their leases. And in fact, I think the lease component works out to be about 0.08% of total revenue. So any business that's paying 0.08% for their leased premises would be very happy in other industries. The second one is pastoralists sign a lease fully aware that the territory retains the right of the minerals. When pastoralists enter into a pastoral lease agreement or contract, they are very aware that they have no legal tenure to the minerals or the timber resources. Section 38 clause B spells out that the reservation of all minerals in or on leased land shall remain with the territory, and similarly 38K states that it's a condition that there is a reservation of all timber. So when you obtain a pastoral lease, you know absolutely up front that the resources are not yours. And repeating, the land access agreement is a pastoralist's opportunity to be adequately compensated for direct operational and capital impacts. I'm not aware of any legal basis for giving pastoral leaseholders a royalty entitlement just because the pastoralists have requested or demanded that they should get royalty compensation. Nor am I aware of any reason to justify this recommendation that it's in the interest of the Territorians or the Crown. Potential negative precedent set for pastoralists to demand compensation for other activities that can legally occur on their land. Again, when pastoralists enter into a lease agreement, they are fully aware that they are required to provide access to the leased land for several other categories of business and or people. So 38 spells out that the minister or his appointee has a reservation of a right of entry and inspection. Native title holders have a right of access, as in Section N, as a reservation in favour of Aboriginal inhabitants of the Northern Territory. Section 78 indicates that the general public, and this is not widely understood, have access to waterways that are either A, perennial waters, or land within the prescribed distance from those waters. That includes sea. Section 81 indicates that the general public has a right of access to features of public interest that have been gazetted by the minister. Section 84 spells out the general public or business individuals or businesses who have been licensed by the minister may enter the nominated pastoral lease for certain purposes and can take from the land things including wood, timber, stone, shell, gravel, clay, earth, salt, seaweed, bark and the like. So in addition to people who are running mining activities or exploration and timber harvesting, in addition, the people who also have the rights to mineral activity and harvesting also have a right to access that land. So when you sign up a lease, you are fully aware that there's quite a multiple range of people who've had access to the resources and access to some of the features on that land. So I consider that it's a bit disingenuous of pastoralists to demand a gas royalty that is justified on the basis of operational disturbance when the law clearly states that they're obligated to share access of their lease with these other multiple parties right from the beginning. There are no surprises. It also sets a potential to set a precedent for pastoralists to demand compensation for all of the other activities that can legally occur within their lease. So if a pastoralist is given an entitlement to receive a royalty from gas exploration or gas production, it doesn't take much imagination to envisage they would demand royalty or could demand royalty from all other businesses that have a right to obtain mineral and timber resources. In the scheme of things, some of the businesses who might access those are quite small operations. Indigenous people collecting timber for didgeridoo making, small sand quarriers, gem fossicers and the like. And how long before the industry is demanding access payment compensation from the general public on native titles who also have an access to the lease. To provide a royalty entitlement to pastoralists who only lease their land will have far-reaching implications well into the future, more than just pacifying their request. The gas footprint is overall minimal. Typically, as we've learnt, 2K pads generally for exploration, that it does occur over a short period of time, and 200 metre squared pads for production. For many pastoral properties, the area around each watering point that can be degraded to the point that it no longer is grass producing can cover an area larger than the well pad in production. In the final draft report, I recall, I think I've interpreted correctly, that say a Gale-sized development scenario will use 0.03% of the pastoral land. So this is very minor and doesn't want a royalty payment in compensation, particularly when the NTCA has indicated publicly that 45-50% of pastoral land in the Barkly region is undeveloped, I should say. And those are similar ratios across the Northern Territory. So there's plenty of room for both industries to coexist without pastoralists needing an additional royalty payment for any loss of use of land. And fifth, and the final point, is the NT government and its citizens need the royalty payment far more critically than any pastoralist would need. Of the 224 pastoral leases, approximately 26%, as you're well aware, it's been speculation or been noted in the media more recently, pastoral leaseholders are international companies. Of the remaining 70 plus leaseholders, an estimated 30 to 40% are national companies or interstate family holding companies. So the minority of leases appear to be NT owned and operated, and a small portion at that. So why would Territorians or the Northern Territory Government on behalf of the Crown give up royalties to wealthy international and national companies or wealthy interstate families at the expense of the needs of Territorians? And I could talk a lot more about, us being a welfare state and so forth like that, but I think that's been generally understood across the community now, and particularly more recently. We've got an NT Treasury discussion paper circulating with talking about raising revenues, by way of taxing mum and dad wage earners in sales tax and duties and things like that, and yet we would be discussing giving away our royalties, as I said, primarily to internationals and national companies. That doesn't sit very well. Local engagement. I think I may have mentioned in a previous presentation that NARMCO does Indigenous business development, particularly in regional areas. We're working with a regional Indigenous business that has a contract with a leading gas company, and that contract has recently been renewed to the 18th of December. It's a sizable contract, but particularly gives continued revenue throughout the wet season, which is always a challenge for regional businesses. So it's allowed them to keep some staff engaged and has assisted with that wet season cash flow. In all of our discussions with those companies, that company and other companies, and all the work that we do through KMSA and engaging at expos and any other forum with the gas companies, there are very sound indications that the regional businesses will, including Indigenous businesses, will get an opportunity to engage in future exploration if the moratorium is listed, and indicatively there are reasonable expectations that those same businesses will engage in production at some levels. I'm aware, or we are aware, of another leading gas company that's placed a priority on local engagement as they've gone forth to seek to identify potential contractors for some of their exploration activities that have now been put on hold. It's fair to say that the way in which they called for tenders, placed the emphasis on the local engagement and did their assessment is reassuring for us at a local level.
Who's that?
That's Santos. Yep. I don't want to... There's a lot more background to that, but there is commercial sensitivities around that. But from our position, having watched this play out, we are reasonably satisfied that there is real intent and that the national service providers are being signalled that there is real intent that they must demonstrate on the ground. So again, reassuring for us. In some of the discussion there's been, that there won't be local engagement because there'll be, too much FIFO, and the reality is there has to be FIFO, there's specialist expertise need to be imported in. But if the resource is proved and the industry is able to move forward, it's an industry that all indications will operate for a number of decades. That's more than enough time to upskill locals into some of the required trades. It's enough time to create educational pathways to students to enter at either a trade level or at a technical level, and it's enough time for local companies to develop inherent capability that would enable them to continue to service well into the decades. So yes, initially we accept there will be FIFO, and there may always be for some of the highly specialised areas, but it's in what we're growing to understand in more detail about the opportunities, particularly downstream production, there is every opportunity that local businesses can upskill and get engaged quite reasonably. So I think that's... Happy to take any questions, but that's the end of the formal presentation.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Very useful. Were you reading out from the Act before in terms of the... Okay, all right. Sorry.
Pastoral Land Act.
Yep, I can get a copy of that. That's great. And the other thing is, are you going to turn your what you read out into a submission for the purpose of the inquiry?
Minus Santos's name, yes, I can.
Good, excellent. No, I strongly encourage you to do that. I thought as I said, I thought it was quite important, some of the points that you raised. Thank you. Right. Any question? Yes, Dr. Jones.
You mentioned the figure that 45% of the land in the Barkly region is underdeveloped. Does that mean it's not the subject of existing mining leases or petroleum leases, or it's not the subject of existing pastoral leases, or is it just that it's undeveloped in terms of even pastoral?
Underdeveloped for pastoral use. So people have pastoral lands and they're only using a portion of that land for pastoral use. Yeah. And may I say that I'm relatively comfortable in saying that's fairly typical, not just of the Barkly, but we happen to be at a Barkly Regional Economic Development Conference. NTCA gave a presentation, and in the course of talking about opportunities to develop, indicated that there was massive room for additional pastoral developments in the Barkly through our own industry knowledge, that there is a lot of development potential in each of these pastoral properties. And the reality is either the internationals or the national companies are not investing heavily enough, or the businesses are not sustainable in order to expand actively.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Professor Hart.
Just following on there, how important or how dependent is that additional on water, that additional development?
My understanding that water's not the prime barrier.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an attitude and it's finance that are the barriers, not water restrictions.
It's finance for what?
Sorry, finance the infrastructure, so fences, tanks, irrigation systems.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So
That's water.
yes, no, I'm talking about the infrastructure, not the yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Beck.
During the presentation, I think that you indicated that there may be opportunities for local companies to get involved in exploration and drilling, I think you said. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that and give me an indication of what you see as the potential there.
Currently, the reality, not just the potential, is that contracts has been given for property surveillance. So actually going out and making sure that there's been no disturbance to the sites, the well sites. Emergency well alarm responses. So if a well alarm is activated, that there's an emergency response with a limited period of time. So that's you're needing local people who can get on out to the site immediately and make an assessment, and then call back to the technical experts for direction. There's the maintenance of the sites in terms of fire breaks and weeds management, and that may just mean slashing. But in this particular case, the gas company is doing making a community contribution and maintaining a local airstrip, and so this company has the contract to actually go and slash and maintain that airstrip and indicate if there's any repairs that need to be done to that airstrip as well. So that's real. From there, we are in continued discussions about opportunities. In addition to those, there's actually a lot more vigorous site security. So I was talking about surveillance, but actual on-site security. There are all of the camp facilities, waste removal, both industrial waste, water waste. I'll take that back, not water waste, as in industrial water waste, but camp water waste and camp wastage. If there is a need for any feral animal management and ongoing weeds management, treatment of noxious weeds and just for fire breaks and ease of access, then that would be legitimate. Transport is another area that would reasonably expect. Any of the civil works that is going on in exploration, Pangaea clearly demonstrated that through their heavy use of local service providers in the considerable amount of their civil construction, that there is local capacity to do that work. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much for that.
And do you know, sort of these examples that you've provided, thank you for that, what percentage, just roughly, is Aboriginal?
Aboriginal people would have capacity, in reality, to do all of what I've mentioned. Getting involved in camp services, getting involved in land management, weeds management, getting involved in transport, getting involved with waste removal are all things that we are attempting to position some of our Aboriginal clients to achieve. So there's no real impediments there that we see for them not to secure this work, other than typical business impediments, which is lack of capital.
Sure.
Can I just follow up? You mentioned that there's clearly two phases. There's what's currently happening and what's the potential. In terms of the current, how many people are employed and how many well sites are being serviced at the moment, just so we can start to get a sense of the magnitude of employment attached to the wells? There
are only 4 well sites by this company.
Yes.
I'm going to make an assumption that every other well site that is in existence would be receiving this, would have contracted somebody else to do the same service, similar service. So I can't speak for the other sites.
No,
so, but we're the company that we're supporting is managing 4 well sites.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And in terms of employment, what does that sort of look like?
It's 2 people to travel out and do the regular surveillance, 2 people to do the well emergency responses, and then when they're doing the weeds management, it can be 2 or 3 people involved in that.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Dr. Jones, and then...
I noticed you mentioned well emergency response. I guess that's of interest to us from the point of view of things that might happen on these well sites, from the point of view of environmental impact or other things. Could you give us a flavour for what this might involve? Have you had any emergency call-outs? You don't have to be specific, but...
No, I don't have the knowledge of that. There have been. None of them have actually resulted in an incident. So they've tended to be, my understanding is, what you would call a false alarm. In that sense, there's been no actual incidents to respond to. Yeah.
Just following up a little bit on that, one of our interests in this industry is how well they monitor things and telemetry streams and whether it's possible. Do you have any involvement in maintaining those services?
Yep. Because I'm talking on the spot, there are so many things that when you ask where are all the jobs, you've just reminded me of another discussion that we've had with one of the companies, and that's about providing a support crew as they undertake water testing. So as they go and conduct their bore testing, they would need a crew that providing some of the pumps and on-site toilets have to be taken. And depending on that, there may be an opportunity for the company to actually be trained in some of that water testing and extraction, so that then they can be going out and conducting that ongoing monitoring and then sending the water samples off to be tested and managing that. So that's another little contract that is, should the moratorium be lifted, that we would expect that could go to a regional business and Aboriginal business.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Anderson.
Question for Ms. Cummings about the weed management activities that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Can you give us some idea of what the weed problems are and what the management activities are?
At the moment, because it's in exploration stage, it's more fire breaks around the actual well sites. It could include, if there were any noxious weeds detected, then there would be, I would imagine the company would approve an immediate response to that. There are, again, without knowing where this will go and how much land the gas companies may end up acquiring, but there are some ongoing programs for Parkinsonia, say through the Beetaloo area and through the water catchment area. The Commonwealth Government trickles its money down through various organisations, but what it does result in is local companies then getting contracts to particularly go out into waterways, stock routes and pastoral properties to do annual weeds management on those sites. And it's sort of anticipated that as activity increases in that area, then there would be more weeds management, particularly of Parkinsonia in that Beetaloo area.
And have you seen any examples of weeds being spread through these exploration wells?
I'm not down on site, but from the invoicing coming through, yes, they have done weeds management. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And have done slashing as well. Yeah.
No further questions. Again, Mr. Crowhurst, Ms. Cummings, thank you for coming again to present. Again, every time you have come, you have given a thoughtful and important presentation. Thank you for engaging with the inquiry.
Okay.
And please do, yes, turn that into a submission and give it to the inquiry.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.